why is the crime so high? When did this? Was it always this way? Was South Africa just from its inception just this high crime place where people are being raped, murdered, and you got to live in caged houses?
Well, that probably deserves a long answer, but it's not supposed to be like that. So when the new South Africa started, as it was called in the 90s, the former president, F.W. de Klerk, was asked at a press conference, how will you know if this new South Africa is a good idea or not? And he notoriously responded by saying, the crime statistics will show if it was a good idea or not. If there's a decrease in violent crime, then we did the right thing. And there was a decrease, and now it's picking up again. So the crime in the moment, there's about 27,000 murders in South Africa per year. And the murder rate, in terms of the ratio, is 45 people per 100,000 per year. Now, just for perspective, the global average is 6 per 100,000. And in many European countries, it's 1 per 100,000. So it's very high. And I think there are many reasons why there are such high crime levels. One is obviously poverty. But it's not sufficient to just say people commit murder and torture because they are poor. Another part of the dimension that isn't that often said, but I would say equally important, is that those in power in South Africa have actively encouraged a culture of violence throughout the years. Their political strategy was making the country ungovernable, encouraging violent riots and so forth. And I think the country is still suffering from that.
Was there like an inflection point where murder just skyrocketed and went really high, or was it like a gradual increase over the years that it got worse and worse?
It skyrocketed in the 80s and 90s as a result of political violence, with the political transition in South Africa from the apartheid system to the new system. And then it went down, I guess, in the late 90s, and then maybe the early 2000s, it started picking up again. And now it's just gradually increasing. So there's no sign that it's going to decrease. But then the part of people always talk about the murder rates, but the part of the equation that is not talking about enough is the rapes, like the sexual offences and you don't even know. South Africa is often called the rape capital of the world, or the murder and rape capital of the world,
and the baby rape capital of the world.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And there's some religious connotations to that, and some what they call muti murders, and so yes, it's just, and then adding the dimension of gang-related violence, and then of course adding the farm murders. It's just a very violent country, and it's very sad.
Wow. You were backpacking through there.
Yeah.
Did you have to carry a gun?
Yeah, I was kind of crazy because you're going through places like Nairobi, Tanzania, Malawi, like very desolate places where there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of poverty, a lot of desperation. And I would tell people my plans, those people, the locals there, I'd be like, well, yeah, and I'm going to finish off in South Africa, like Johannesburg and Cape Town. And they would recoil in horror when I would tell them this. Like, I'd be in the bush in Malawi, and oh, you're going to South Africa? What's wrong with you? So it's like, even in Africa, even elsewhere in the continent, South Africa has this, grim reputation.
Now, it didn't have that before.
Right, yeah. And so it was something I was aware of when I was traveling. I was pretty careful. I'd like to think I did my homework, but even then I do think there was a bit of luck involved in not getting myself in a too crazy of a situation. I would pay random people as like bodyguards when I'd want to go into like the CBD in Johannesburg and stuff. But
the CBD in Johannesburg is exceptionally dangerous.
It was crazy. I don't know if you can if it's legal or not, but I just asked a guy. I was like, "Hey, is anybody there that you know?" I had a friend in Johannesburg. I was like, "Do you know anybody that's like was a gangbanger, someone that like has a bad reputation, was a good person now, so to speak?" And he's like, "I know a guy. He found me a guy that's like 6'5". I gave him like $100, and he just took me around the Johannesburg CBD for like a few hours, and no one would touch me."
So
it's crazy.
I asked our good AI psychotic demon ChatGPT for some answers. I asked it about crime in South Africa, and it says that murder is at 45 per 100,000 people. It's the fourth highest globally. And I then asked, was crime as bad during apartheid? No. Crime, especially violent crime like murder, was significantly lower during apartheid compared to post-apartheid South Africa, but the reasons are complex and often misunderstood, it says. Okay, well, I didn't ask it that. I then asked, you mentioned sexual violence. It says rape in South Africa is often perceived as a post-apartheid epidemic, but the truth is far more complex. While formal reporting increased sharply after 94, sexual violence has deep roots that stretch back into apartheid and even colonial times. Now, the interesting thing is, the argument that it's making about violent crime is it's saying South Africa just didn't report the violent crime largely in the black community, so it seems like rape was substantially less during apartheid. However, I then, of course, ask the very obvious question. Did the end of apartheid cause an increase in interracial violent crime? And the answer is yes. After the end of apartheid, interracial violent crime, particularly black on white, became more visible and politically sensitive. I like how they phrase it. But ultimately, although I didn't ask, it does state that for obvious reasons, the increase in crime that is perceived is that you had a developed nation and a largely segregated population, and the desegregation resulted in much more racial interaction, which dramatically increased crime against white people from the black community. It then goes on to add, for seemingly no reason, which I didn't ask for, it says, but consider whites are not being genocide. This is false. Black on white crime, it's only partially true, and it's because you can see it, and no one is actually attacking white people for being white. Which, again, this is the funny thing about these AIs is that I didn't ask it that. I just asked if interracial violent crime has increased. Yes, but nobody asked you to get politically correct on us. I think it's fairly obvious to consider that if you have a segregated population, you desegregate, you're going to see interracial violent crime, and this is going to create a lot of the perceptions we see today.
It's just that there's a couple of things, though. So South Africa's population has always been majority black, right? So there were, under apartheid, roughly 5 million white people, 30 million black people. Then you had the Indian population and colored. So the country, when you say segregated, it's not inaccurate, but it also doesn't reflect the reality of South Africa. There was always a very segregated society. I mean, a very integrated society, because just by the nature of it, people may not have, you may have had areas where under apartheid, where black people had to live and white people lived here and the beaches were segregated, but there was still a lot of intermingling within the society just by the sheer numbers. And one of the things that happened is that the ANC under Nelson Mandela had a policy of liberation before education, liberation before everything else. So really, in South Africa, you were never poor during the struggle, because you were part of something that was noble. So your poverty was part of something that was a struggle, and it had an identity to it, and it had a purpose to it, and people were united in this common goal of creating justice and equality for all. So everything that happened in the home, you could never talk about domestic violence or rape, because none of those things, everything was subjugated to this greater struggle that overwhelmed everything and provided some kind, there was a feeling of real unity as people, in fact, people of both races actually worked towards this. And so once the wall came down of apartheid, South Africa teetered on the brink of all-out war for a very long time. I would go into those townships. I saw people who were necklaced, which was a form of killing, which is where they put a tire on you. It was really began with informants, people that they thought were betraying them and working with the South African police and so on. And they would put a tire on you and burn you alive as a symbol of what they did to people who betrayed their own. And so, I went into these areas of extreme violence. There was also a third force in South Africa, which was created by the South African government, which was designed to create violence between the tribes, the two main tribes, the Zulu and the Xhosa, so that they could make the argument that black people would never be able to govern themselves. And so there was a commission that was created to investigate the third force. Judge Richard Goldstone ultimately identified that, and this was the basis of the commission that for Truth and Reconciliation that Archbishop Tutu created. And what all of this means is that you got a peaceful transition, but a peaceful transition that papered over the cracks. And some of that expressed itself in violence, because literally overnight after the South African election, that nobility that people found, that unity that they found in their poverty, became just poverty. And people were left. And then the politicians started to steal everything. And the poverty, and what people did is over time they've lost hope. And when you see that decline in hope, that is part of what is driving the violence, and part of because there's never been structures put in place to heal those wounds in South Africa. Instead, a Marxist slapped a label on it that said it's racism. And so now, instead of there being real personal accountability, there's a get out of jail free card for everything and everyone.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.